It was late, the kind of late where the silence becomes unnerving. Mia had always enjoyed the quiet of the night, but tonight felt different. The shadows in her apartment seemed to move with a life of their own, creeping along the walls as the clock ticked past midnight. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from an unknown number. Don't look out the window. Confused, Mia scoffed. Who could be playing such a sick joke? With a chuckle, she stood up, brushing off the warning, and approached the window. She peered through the blinds, and for a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. The street below was deserted, the only movement the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. But then, she saw a figure standing across the street, just behind a street lamp. It was impossible to make out their face, but the figure was unmistakably watching her. A cold chill ran down her spine. Her phone buzzed again. If you see them, they see you. Mia backed away, her heart racing. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the figure, which now seemed to move closer, their face still hidden in the shadows. Every part of her screamed to lock the door, call the police, but the warning from the strange text echoed in her mind. Suddenly, the figure stepped into the light. It was no one, just an empty space where someone should have been. Her breath caught in her throat, and then Mia heard it. A whisper, faint but clear, coming from behind her. You shouldn't have looked. Before she could turn around, the lights flickered, and the apartment door slammed shut on its own. The one thing you should never do when alone at night? Look outside when you're warned not to. Frozen with fear, Mia's mind raced. Her instincts told her to run, but her body refused to obey. The apartment seemed to close in on her, every shadow stretching toward her like hungry arms. She took a shaky breath, daring to glance back at the window. The figure was gone, but the empty space where it had been left a void that seemed to pulse with something unnatural. The silence grew thick, pressing against her eardrums until she could almost hear a heartbeat that wasn't her own. Her phone buzzed again, and with trembling hands, she unlocked it. The message read there inside. The floor creaked softly behind her. She whipped around, but there was nothing, only the faintest hint of movement in the corner of her eye. Her heart raced as she realized the presence wasn't in one place. It was everywhere, lurking in every shadow, hiding in every darkened corner of her apartment. Mia backed into the kitchen, her eyes scanning for anything she could use to defend herself. She grabbed a knife from the counter, gripping it tightly. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. It's already too late. The lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging the apartment into darkness. Panic surged through her veins as she tried to make out her surroundings. Her eyes strained, adjusting to the dim light from the street outside. Suddenly, a cold, icy hand gripped her shoulder. She let out a scream and swung the knife wildly behind her, but her blade met nothing but air. She staggered back, heart hammering in her chest, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Just as she thought she'd lost the unseen presence, her phone buzzed one final time. Stop running. Accept your fate. In that moment, Mia felt a dark, oppressive force wrap around her, pulling her into the shadows. Her screams echoed, fading into silence as the apartment swallowed her whole, leaving only a chilling emptiness behind. When the police arrived the next morning, all they found was Mia's phone lying on the floor. A single message on the screen: one thing you should never do when alone at night. The police studied the apartment, finding it unsettlingly silent. There were no signs of a struggle, yet Mia was gone without a trace. The only clue was her phone, with the strange message still displayed on the screen. Detective Allen, a seasoned officer, couldn't shake a feeling of dread as he reviewed the case. The words on the screen seemed to burn into his mind: one thing you should never do when alone at night. That night, as Detective Allen sat alone in his office, he caught himself staring at Mia's last message again. Something about it seemed off, as if it was calling to him. He rubbed his tired eyes and muttered to himself, just a creepy prank. But deep down, he felt a chill in his bones. Just as he was about to put the phone away, his own phone buzzed with a new message. His heart skipped a beat as he read, don't look in the mirror. He turned to glance at the office mirror, feeling both curious and fearful. Ignoring his instincts, he cautiously stepped toward it. The reflection showed only his tired face staring back at him. He let out a nervous laugh, convincing himself it was just a trick his mind was playing. But as he looked away, something caught his attention in the corner of his eye. His reflection had not moved. It was still staring straight at him, with an eerie, unnatural grin stretching across its face. Detective Allen froze, a chill creeping up his spine. His reflection raised a finger to its lips, gesturing for silence. Before he could react, it whispered in a low, mocking voice, "You shouldn't have looked." Panic overwhelmed him, but he was paralyzed with fear. The lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the room. The reflection continued to grin, its eyes darkening into hollow voids. As the lights dimmed, Alan felt a cold presence behind him, a shadow stretching over his shoulder. His own reflection leaned closer, whispering in his ear, "There's no escape once you've seen us." He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The room darkened further, and soon there was only silence and an empty office, with a single phone on the desk, displaying a message: "One thing you should never do when alone at night." Weeks later, the cleaning staff found the abandoned office with the phone lying eerily on Alan's desk. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, as though no one had been there for years. The screen had one last message: "We are watching." No one saw Detective Allen again, and as rumors spread about the strange disappearances, the message became a haunting reminder whispered among those who dared to stay alone at night: "Don't look when you're warned not to." Months passed, and the case of Mia and Detective Allen's mysterious disappearances faded into local legend. People whispered about it in hushed tones, calling it the Shadow Curse. Anyone who read the ominous warning text vanished without a trace, and few were brave enough to even talk about it openly. Yet, curiosity knows no bounds, and that's what led James, a rookie journalist with the local newspaper, to the story. He'd heard about the disappearances but brushed them off as urban legends. Determined to make a name for himself, he spent hours digging into the strange case, gathering every detail he could find. One night, while James was typing up his findings, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the notification, feeling a thrill at the possibility of a new lead. But when he read the message, his heart sank. "One thing you should never do when alone at night." James laughed nervously, feeling a twinge of unease. It had to be a prank. Maybe one of his friends was messing with him after seeing his interest in the case. Still, he couldn't shake the chill that ran through him as he reread the message. Then came another message: "Don't open the closet door." James froze, glancing toward his closet at the far side of the room. The door was slightly ajar, casting a narrow strip of darkness into the dim light. He stared at it, torn between skepticism and a nagging fear. But he was a journalist, not one to give in to ghost stories. Muttering to himself, "This is ridiculous," he got up, marched across the room, and pulled the closet door open wide. Inside, only his clothes hung neatly, untouched. He let out a relieved sigh, a smirk playing on his lips as he turned away until he heard a faint, hollow voice behind him whisper, "You shouldn't have looked." He spun around, but the closet was empty. Yet, the darkness inside seemed deeper, darker than before. His eyes struggled to adjust, but it was as if the shadows within were alive, swirling and shifting. Then, slowly, a figure began to emerge from the shadows in the closet, taking shape tall, gaunt figure with hollow, sunken eyes that held an eternal darkness. Its gaze locked onto James, who stumbled backward, terror freezing him in place. The figure reached out a long, bony hand toward him, each movement deliberate and unervingly slow. James backed up, whispering to himself, "This can't be real, this can't be happening." The figure's voice echoed in his mind, a rasping whisper: "Once you see us, you belong to us." Before he could scream, the shadows surged forward, engulfing him in an icy darkness. His last sensation was the feeling of cold hands pulling him into the void, his surroundings fading to black. When James' colleagues arrived the next morning, all they found was his phone lying on the desk. With a new message on the screen: "One thing you should never do when alone at night." The legend grew, spreading through town with each new disappearance. each person swallowed by the darkness after ignoring the warning. No one knew who or what was sending the messages, but everyone agreed on one thing: once you receive the warning, there is no escape.